So this sort of approach is initially quite hard to get your head around as a journalist, because you're used to being taught the sort of like inverted pyramid, and you're being taught to, create these cohesive narratives. But when you sort of liberated from that and you're thinking about just what's new and what the reader actually needs to know, you're not trying to fit to a word count. You're giving as much information as is necessary. And really, we try and do that in a concise a unit as possible. So really, we aim for about 300 characters per screen. And any more than that is, we're really pushing it. We'll send 2 notifications if it's any more than that. What it allows us to do is to scale upwards. So in a standard newsroom, if your amount of journalists stays the same, your content output stays the same. Because you're creating new stories, you have a flat amount of content. If you want to increase the amount of content you have, or the amount of stories, you have to double the amount of journalists you have. What we're able to do is, because we're only maybe adding 1 paragraph to a story to update it rather than 500 words, is create a lot more content. And so as time goes on, we're able to update the old, when we update the old stories, the amount of new stories we have goes up, but then the amount of old stories that we're keeping alive increases. So for example, it's a pretty silly one, but there was a guy in a clown mask scaring people in Northampton. I don't know if you knew that story. It was a very weird one, but there's a guy going around Northampton with a clown mask and just standing at roadsides and scaring people. And we did this story because it was a really slow day. And usually we have a much higher threshold for new content, but it was a slow day. It was a funny story, and there's this clown who's staring at motorists. And we updated that over the week as there was more sightings of the clown, and then the clown did a newspaper interview and was revealed. And then we thought, okay, that story's dead. That sometimes a story just dies and goes away. And then a copycat came along in Staten Island, New York, a year later. And so we updated the old story of the Northampton clown with that new stuff. So there's a lot of times where you think, oh, a story's dead, and it could be 18 months, 2 years old. Then this new information will come up, and we've got all the background context from the old stories just ready to go. We've got the story all ready to go. We can also do things like if a notable figure has ill health, we can rewrite the obituary like anybody else does. But what we can do is take the story about it being their health failing, and then when they die, we have the obituary ready to go. So we can just push that out to readers. We announce that Nelson Mandela has passed, and we've got the obituary ready to go there as well. So we started, we launched 18 months ago, and we're on the 2nd major version of our app. And we're probably the 3rd version's coming pretty soon. But in that time, I don't know if anybody else has seen this, but this is an internal report commissioned by the New York Times to assess their digital efforts and comparing it to the digital efforts of others. And sort of in the last 2 years, we've been able to establish ourselves as a competitor to the New York Times, which is very flattering that they're sort of spying on what we're doing. The report's very interesting because it's worth reading, and I can send a link out to it. But they're identifying internal problems of large news organizations. And there's this sort of jealousy of new startups and what they're able to do without the restrictions that a legacy organization has. Because they have 1,800 employees. And to bring anything new to the table, the New York Times requires incredible amounts of internal politics, trying to get resources from other places. It's a nightmare for them. And actually in that document, this is completely lifted from their document, they identify what these disruptive innovators are, and Circa is named as one of these. And it's introduced by an outsider. Well, both of our co-founders have no prior experience in news. They didn't come from news organizations. One co-founder, Matt, had started an aggregator for Twitter and Facebook feeds 5 years ago and sold that to AOL. The other one is Ben. He started a meme site called I Can House Cheeseburger, which is like all funny cat gifs. And so there's no real news background there. But Ben had this idea, and we fleshed it out. But it came with no preconceived notion of what a news organization is, how it's structured. We started with a carte blanche. It's less expensive than existing products. Well, we're free, and the New York Times charges you $30 a month for their digital package. Targeting underserved or new markets. Well, we went for a new market, which was mobile phone. There's been mobile phone apps before us, but they were essentially readers. They were taking the web content and, tailoring it up for the phone. It's not content for the phone. I like the fourth one, which is very typical of the New York Times, which is to call something inferior to them. It depends what your definition of inferior is. Comparing journalism side by side, the New York Times is going to whip pretty much everybody. But in terms of a mobile experience, I'd say we edged them out. And advanced by an enabling technology. So the mobile phone is a great bit of kit because the way you've accessed news before is a dead tree. It's a television screen that beams something at you and you can't do anything back to it. Your computer, you have limited inputs into that. You can type. You've got a webcam. But a mobile phone, you've got a GPS sensor. You've got a camera. You can type back. You can video back. There's a motion sensor. There's all these sensors on the device that news organizations could, but aren't taking advantage of. And that's probably something to think about for this weekend as well, is are there any sort of sensors, inputs that news organizations aren't taking advantage of? So Snowfall is touted as this piece of media innovation. And it's becoming a bit of a cliche. And I don't want to hate on the New York Times too much, but they weren't the first organization to come up with this article format. It's very beautiful. It's a great story, but they weren't the first. It was still a traditional story. It could have just been a newspaper story, a very long one. And this is a quote that I liked, which was from their internal report, which is, I'd rather have a snowfall builder than a snowfall. So that's from Kevin Delaney at a news organization called Quartz. And Quartz are part of Atlantic Media. And they're a pretty small team, but they're expanding rapidly. And they've concentrated on building tools to enable their journalists to do stuff. So they've got this great open source chart builder. If you want to, if you've got some data and you want to present it nicely, you can go on their GitHub page and present the chart really nicely. They like building tools for their journalists. And that's one thing that organizations need to get in the mindset of doing, is enabling their journalists. So the New York Times doesn't have an easy way to replicate that website. It was handcrafted, and it took a team of, I think, about 30 people to pull it off, which is, you know, that's double the amount of some newsrooms, and it was just for one article, and it was for a good while. So this is a big mindset shift over the last couple of years. And there's a lot of talk about like third screen experiences or second screen experiences, because the TV has long been the dominant screen in a person's life. And then it's, you know, the laptop or computer screen. And then, you know, 5-6 years ago, you maybe had a smartphone. You maybe had still had just a text messaging phone. But now, people are using their mobile phone as their first device that they use in the morning. You wake up, it's on your nightstand, you check, if you've got any messages, Twitter, news feeds. It's the first device that people are going for, and it's fine to be digital first, but if that digital product isn't translating well to mobile, then it's pretty much useless. Another big shift, and this is I notice a lot in the US, is tweaking how newsrooms work. And the second one, Obsessions, is the one that's really interesting. That's also from Quartz. And they've done away with the idea of beats. So, you have, in a traditional newsroom, an education reporter. You have the media reporter, national security reporter, business reporters. They've done away with that and said, concentrate on things that are interesting, but concentrate on topics rather than these overarching categories. Because an overarching category is there to fill a newspaper page. It's not there, or it's not needed for a digital product. So they have obsessions like they'll have one person who's just concentrating on the Pfizer-AstraZeneca deal. They're a business publication, so they'll have someone concentrating on energy in China. They'll have somebody concentrating on pollution in the US. People take ownership of these individual topics rather than, right, you're the science editor, you're the education editor. And that's how we work at Circa as well. People take ownership of certain topics, but they can be very broad. So I cover a lot of, I'm covering the World Cup a lot, but I'm also covering American football. I also cover Ukraine. These are the things I'm interested in, I'm paying attention to, and I'm covering them.